Hi, this is Lisa, and unfortunately, our Zoom session did not get recorded this evening. So I'm going to just kind of recap what we covered or what I covered during the meeting on January 13th. Welcome to class, and I've read through many of your introductions, and I'm super impressed with your backgrounds, interests, and experiences. And I can just say that based on what I'm reading, I think we're going to have some really great discussions. Um, just some requirements and some recommendations for succeeding in class. I'm not going to read this entire presentation, but I will share it. And just to start, I'd like to say that all courses are different, whether you've been at Champlain for a couple years now or this is your first class. Every class and every instructor is different. Just be sure you understand the information in the course syllabus and understand the expectation for graded work. And there's always going to be rubrics with anything that's going to be graded except for the labs. And I think it should be pretty clear what's expected in the lab. And if you ever have a question or unsure, please let me know. Um, I recommend that students read the announcements regularly. That's kind of the way I use to communicate with students during the week. Um, each week I will post some weekly hints, and I'll give you a link to that shortly. But I recommend that you read through those hints. I provide kind of a strategy for approaching the week's work and the information so you can kind of most efficiently um, digest all of the course materials and do your work and kind of have a good starting point. And sometimes there might be some extra kind of reminders or suggestions in there as well. So students have said that this is a challenging course and that it takes more time than other courses. Um, there's a ton of information that gets covered in this course, and I feel like there could be some weeks where our discussions could go on and on and on because the topics are just so interesting and so deep, and there's always different levels where we can learn and where we can discuss things. So I just encourage you to allow yourself plenty of time, start your work early, at least get a feel for about how much time you're going to need to spend on things during the week, and just give yourself time to learn, to ask questions. I know waiting until the last minute on Sundays just sometimes can prove to be frustrating for students. Now, I know some students have 20 years of experience in computers and technology and networking, and you're not really the ones I'm talking to because I worry sometimes that you're going to maybe not get as much as you'd like to out of the course. But we have a very, very broad range of backgrounds and experience in this class. Just read through um, the requirements for each week, and you'll know if you're uh, familiar with the topics that you'll be able to get through the labs relatively easily. But if it's something that looks brand new to you, then I encourage you to start early. Okay. Okay, so there is a good bit of content and materials in the course. I wish that there were one book or one website that had everything, and unfortunately, there's not. The textbook does provide a good, solid foundation for forensic principles, and you'll notice that some of the references and examples may seem out of date, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, I recognize that, and there are books that are may have more current examples, but the forensic principles really haven't changed that much. And there's a few, especially with regard to some cell phone forensics, maybe, and also with live imaging. And again, we address those with the other course materials. So these are things that, I'll talk about in those weekly presentations at the beginning of the course and also in the discussions. Really, you shouldn't need to use many, if any, outside materials to complete the labs and assignments. Everything you need is in that module. Every now and then for discussion, you may want to go and do some research for a topic. That's fine. But I really caution students against diving in or opening an assignment or opening a lab and then trying to figure it out on their own. because that can be frustrating, and sometimes the information that you'll find online just isn't exactly right, or it's right, but it's right for something else, not for forensic purposes. So start with the information in those modules. Okay, and I've referred to some hints and helpful files. I'm sharing a link with you that's a link to a Google folder, and inside that folder, it's broken down by week, and there's some other extra files in there. And I'll also send a link to, each kind of quote weekly presentation. But I'm going to just give you access to the entire folder now, and you're welcome to dive in there. And I may update them a little bit, but for the most part, you're not going to have any too many substantive changes. Okay. I, I encourage you to review the expectations for the discussions and how discussions are evaluated. In this class, both the introduction discussion and the week one discussion are graded, and they're graded using the same criteria or the same rubric as the other discussion. So be sure in your introduction discussion that you've met all of those 4 requirements um, that are shown in that grading rubric, which is here, which is application, critical thinking, collaboration, and presentation. And there are explanations of each one of these criteria that are provided a link through the course syllabus. And I'm including some of these um, questions about these criteria. And so really, Champlain College has a philosophy concerning discussions. And the idea is that this is really where learning takes place. So imagine if we were having a classroom discussion, and I'm not the one just lecturing you like I am today, but we're interacting with one another, and I'm maybe a facilitator. And sometimes students might go off and have a side conversation about something, and that's fine. But really, this is a place where students have reported learning a tremendous amount, but it's sort of what they put in is what they get out. So even students that have been working in digital forensics for many years, I worry sometimes, oh, they're not going to learn, much in the class, and they report just engaging and learning a great deal from their peers, and also being able to explore new topics. So please look at these discussions as your opportunity to learn instead of just kind of checking a box. And I think you'll get a lot out of them. So just briefly, to talk about those grading criteria, application measures how a student makes connections between the topics and the discussion starters and other context. And those other contexts can be the course materials, which again is probably all you're going to need. It can also be other coursework, outside resources, or life experiences. But I encourage you to start with the course materials. Certainly, if you have professional or life experience in one of the areas, please share those with us. And one thing that I do look for is whether students are citing their sources. And of course, if you're, um, I've had lawyers in the class. If you're a lawyer and you work with, the legal uh, search and seizure or subpoenas and court orders every day, I don't expect for you to go find a reference to support things that you already know, but just say, hey, I work in the field, and this is what we do. And then I'll know, okay, that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable application. But the discussions aren't just opinions on things. So just be sure that you're demonstrating that the information that you're providing is relevant and reliable, and where you're getting that information. So critical thinking, um, really with critical thinking, you're asking questions, but when I say you're asking questions, you're also answering those questions, or you're exploring those questions, and really thinking beyond what's presented to making connections between multiple sources of information or multiple students' posts. You're kind of looking maybe at a broader picture and making connections, or you're digging deeply into a particular area. So um, it's sometimes hard to describe, but there's a lot of references about critical thinking online. If you want to learn more about it, just send me a text or an email, and I'd be happy to provide those for you. So collaboration is the engagement or the interaction with others during the course. It could be other students, it could be me. But really encourage students to work together to engage in conversation about the discussion topics over the entire week. And so this time frame will give you a chance to really kind of mull over the topics and be sure that when you're interacting with other that your responses are substantive and relevant and that they're meaningful, that you're not just, writing or entering text for the sake of just checking a box. So presentation, only 10 points, a small part of the discussion grade, but just be sure that your posts are well written, that they're free from grammar errors, spelling errors, and that they make sense. So if somebody reads them aloud or they're reading them, that they're going to make sense. I recommend maybe using a grammar checker or spell checker before you post them. Make sure you have citations, and that if you include links, to make sure your links work. Okay. So some common student questions about discussions. Is there a length or word count for posts? No. Please focus on completely providing the message that you're intending to provide, and just avoid thinking that longer is better if that just means adding long quotations or non-substantive writing. So I've seen students that put 5 or 6 references on the bottom of a post and so, well, I don't, I'm looking at them and I don't see any information in the post that would come from a source. So be realistic. Don't just think, oh, you put a whole bunch of stuff, it's going to be better than if you put something that's really well thought out and perhaps shorter. Another question, is there a requirement for a number of posts per week? There is no minimum requirement. However, to meet the criteria for collaboration and critical thinking, students are going to require substantive participation on multiple days each week. And so some posts, such as one that asks a clarifying question, don't really have much significance. So, um, and this isn't to say that there's anything wrong with that, but just think, if you say, oh, could you clarify, if you're talking about only hard drives, or you're talking about all electronic media, that wouldn't necessarily be a real substantive post. You're just asking for some clarification. So I would say if you aim to participate on 4 different days of the week, that would be great. And if you do 3 to 4 days, that's fine too. But just make sure that if you're posting on the minimum, the 3 days, that your posts are quite substantive. That they're all that none of those are clarifying or just sort of, I guess, that you're getting enough bang for the buck, so to speak. Okay, is it necessary to cite course materials? Yes, please cite all of the materials that you use in both your initial and your follow-up posts, and it's helpful to include a link to the source of information directly after the paragraph or phrase using that cited information. So the way you would in MLA or APA format, really just to allow me and your classmates to reference the information that you're providing. And quotations can be used in a post. I would say yes, very short ones. Um, and really the best way to use quotations is if they support your own ideas, but there's no reason to to copy and paste something from a website and then just cite it. Just summarize it in a few sentences and then provide a link to that or a citation, and that way your classmates and I can decide, do we need to, or do we want to go read that whole long piece of information. I hope that you'll find that I'm not somebody that says don't do this, don't do that, but I'm going to do that right now, because if I tried to put this in the affirmative positive, it would probably take me all night. So I'm just going to make some recommendations about things to avoid in the discussion. So posts that ask a lot of questions without also adding content. So chances are that your classmates, just like you, are learning about these topics, and it may have been really challenging for them to have created their post, and it can be super frustrating to prepare a post and just kind of wonder, did I get this right? I'm just trying to understand it, only to have a classmate follow up with 3 or 4 questions that may take as long to find answers to as it would to write the initial post. So if you have a question, you know, try to find that information. Go to the classmates post and look at the references or find other references, and give a shot at your answer and say, hey, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I was curious. This is what I found. What do you think? That is a fantastic way to start a real conversation, engage in real conversation, about these topics, which are quite important. Now, of course, sometimes students will have expertise in certain areas, and in those cases, it might be, completely appropriate to politely ask for clarifications or examples. But you'll probably know that based on the post. If someone said, "Oh, I've been working in this field for 10 years, or I have lots of experience with this forensic tool," then by all means it would be fine to ask a question. But just keep in mind those questions are not really demonstrating your understanding or your knowledge of a particular topic, or that you've done anything to gain that. So, balance those questions with, adding information, making connections between multiple posts or sources of information. The second thing to avoid would be posts that really don't say anything. And so I had a friend who used to say, there are some things that are like potato chips, you know, they're just empty calories. And so I say that sometimes some posts could be thought of as empty calories. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to them, but in the end of the day, you're not getting, any nutrients or any vitamins. And I'm not begrudging potato chips, but I'm just sharing something that I thought was kind of a cute comparison. So just some examples of this are, "Hey, that was really interesting. I never knew. Thanks so much for sharing." I mean, you're writing a whole sentence, but not really saying a lot. Another example, "You said that really well. My post was not nearly as interesting. Your point about XXX was amazing. Thanks so much." Again, it took up a line, a couple sentences, really didn't say anything. And lastly, check out this video. It's about, and then, fill in the topic. Again, not really saying anything. It's best to summarize the information in a few sentences and then post a link if you think it's worth reading. You say, "Hey, this is worth reading because," a little bit of a summary, how it relates to the course materials, and then share the information. And then finally, let's just try to avoid evaluating one another's posts. And what I mean is, just in terms of saying, something's really interesting. I mean, nobody really says, anything's bad, but, um, the way that things can be interpreted or misinterpreted, um, you know, can sometimes cause, just kind of ill feelings. So even when some well-intentioned compliments have been given, I've had to kind of facilitate, what their meaning is. And, some in a past class, a student wrote, "I'm surprised you found that information." And the person who posted kind of interpreted that as meaning, "What, does this person think that I'm stupid?" And that's not what the person intended. But we don't want to spend all day going back and forth and facilitating. We're here to learn, and so there's really no need to, other than maybe "Thank you for sharing that," or and then moving on into the heart of your conversation. So, all right, moving away from discussions, just a recommended approach to your graded work for each week. And so students are required to know the information in the weekly module, and it's necessary to complete the discussion and the lab. And that's for week one. And other weeks you're always going to have discussions, but you might have an assignment instead of the lab. So go to the week one overview and resources. Again, this is what I would do every week, and you will see that you've got objectives, course materials, and requirements. And again, this is a lot of different stuff. Many of them are, pretty short. So there's a good video, um, actually a couple good videos regarding digital forensics, and, some good articles. And so again, those can be used to supplement the textbook readings, or as a good basis for your discussions. And again, both of your discussions should reference that you've read the course materials. Okay, and again, so the introduction discussion is graded. Be sure that you have addressed each portion of that discussion starter, and your post should demonstrate that you have read those course materials. So after completing this week's reading assignments, discuss whether or not the explanation of what it means to be a forensic examiner align with what you previously thought about the field. So if your answer is yes, it does, you're not really demonstrating that you've read the materials. So, expand on that a little bit. Demonstrate your critical thinking on that in the application as well. Okay. And then for the next discussion, digital forensic examination and investigations. One of the things that's required for this post is to kind of discuss the similarities and differences between civil, criminal, and private cases. So I just want to clarify that private cases do not refer to private eyes that are sleuthing around and, hiding out and peering in people's windows and hacking into people's computers. Private investigations or private cases refer to private organizations, oftentimes corporations, that conduct their own internal investigations, often to protect their networks or protect their systems, or for other reasons such as personnel reasons. So again, this is these types of cases and positions employ many forensic examiners, but they aren't those private eyes. And there is some reference to those private investigators in the discussion or in the materials, and they're just a small part of private cases. Again, most of the private cases are going to be in businesses or large organizations. Okay, so the labs, just in general, except for week 7, students can open and close the labs, are also called quizzes, to add or modify their responses. Once that lab is submitted, students may not go back and change an answer. And the reason for this is because some answers are going to be available as soon as the lab is submitted. So it's sort of like, having the answer guide and then using that to answer the questions. You're not really going to get a whole lot out of it. Um, so for many of the labs, once you submit it, you're going to see some, answers, some recommended answers, and um, those aren't always going to be the only answer. So if you entered an answer that's different than what's shown there, I'm going to review your lab, and I'm going to, if at all possible, award credit if your answer is correct. And again, we can't put every single possible correct answer there. So you don't need to send me a message or text me and plead your case, or go into a big explanation about why your answer is correct until it's marked not correct. And then I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. But I've seen students really spend 2 or 3 paragraphs in an email explaining why an answer was right, and I couldn't agree more. And I'd already gone through the quiz and given them credit for it. And so they spent a lot of time justifying their answer that they didn't need to. They could have been using that time for something else. So happy to have a conversation, but just give me a minute or a couple days to grade it. And I try to grade these labs as soon as they come in, so I can get the feedback back to you. Um, Week 7, it is a timed lab. We'll talk more about that later, but it must be completed within 2 hours from the time that lab is first open. And there are a list of areas to study and prepare for completing that lab. And most of the time when students do that, they finish in plenty of time. So we'll talk more about that later. So the week 1 lab requires students to use the virtual desktop infrastructure, or VDI, and the command line interface. If you are familiar with virtual machines and the command line interface, then you can probably just fast forward. But for students who are maybe wondering what this is, or this doesn't sound familiar, or you think, oh, I don't know what the command line is, or I used that a bazillion years ago, um, you may want to pay closer attention. So I recommend accessing the VDI as soon as possible. I am not the administrator for the VDI, so if you have concerns or issues with logging in or login credentials, you contact the help desk. Now, the first thing that they're going to tell you is if you're using a particular browser, say you're using Microsoft Edge, they're going to say try Chrome, or if you're using Chrome, try Firefox. So that's the first step. You may also want to check your firewall settings. But again, if you're not able to log on to the VDI, contact the help desk. You're welcome to send me a message through Canvas and say, hey, just want to let you know I did this. But it's important that you're able to log on, so you're not getting behind in the course. Um, when you're working on the VDI, the work that you do will not be saved. When you log off, or let's just say, let's hope this doesn't happen, but you're on there a long time, and you time out, your work's not going to be saved. So um, what I recommend doing is when you have answers or you take screenshots, that you upload those to cloud storage like a Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever you use, so you can have access to those files. And when you have those files online, then you'll download them, and then you can either add them to an assignment, or you can upload them to a lab or a quiz. And there is a video that demonstrates how to do this. There are kind of screenshotted guides that will walk you through that in that shared folder for week 1. So I do recommend that you start the lab early, especially if you're not familiar with virtual machines or using the command line interface, because sometimes students do run into some challenges there. I recommend allowing enough time to start and finish the lab in one sitting, because the questions will, I'll just say, build on one another. And you'll be required to submit some screenshots and some output that's dependent on the earlier one. So, and I don't have the numbered questions in front of me, but if you, stop with step 6 and then move on to step 7, you might have to go back and complete 1 through 6 again. So, follow each step of the instructions. It might be helpful to print them out or have them open on a different device instead of trying to switch back and forth between screens on a tablet or a laptop. I would find that particularly challenging. Okay, so um, the next few steps kind of walk you through using that VDI and the command line interface. There is also a video, which I'm linking here. And again, I'm sharing this with you. So again, if you want to see a demonstration on some of the things you have to do for the week 1 lab, just watch that video. Video is worth 1,000 words, and I'm not giving you all the answers, but I think that it will help if you're not familiar with the command line interface. Okay, and so I'm going to just kind of scroll through some of this, and you can see that I am in, oops, go back here. So I'm on the VDI here. I just kind of navigated down to this PC and then to the S drive, which is the student shared drive, CFDI 240, and then the week 1 lab. And then within that folder, you're going to see disk image and drive image. Those two are the same exact files. So, and there's a reason for that, which I won't explain here, but these are the files that you need. Okay, and so just keep in mind that if you use drive image, then all of the commands that you use are going to have to say drive image. If you use disk image, you have to type in disk image. Okay, so that kind of makes you think about what you're doing a little bit when you're using that command line interface. So again, you're going to have to move those screenshots from the virtual machine to your local computer. And again, you're going to do that by uploading the screenshots to a cloud drive, and you're going to have to access the internet through the virtual machine just by using one of the icons, the Chrome or the Firefox icon on that machine. So if you're using the Horizon client to access the virtual machine, you're not going to have a URL for your screenshot. That's fine. Just show me that you have the 2 files on your desktop. I just want to make sure that really the only reason I have students do that is because in the past students have not had the files in the right place, which is why the lab hasn't worked out. So I just want to see that you're getting everything where it needs to be to do the lab. Okay, so a common error on the week 1 lab is question number 14. And so students commonly forget to change directories and submit a screenshot of the directory folder, and they submit a screenshot of the directory folder instead of the contents of the new directory folder. So students are required to submit the contents of the new directory folder, okay, not the directory folder. And so this will make more sense when you actually get into the lab. So if you just kind of think, or you write down lab question 14, maybe go back and pay attention, or just really make sure you're looking at what's asked in the directions. Okay. Um, so again, carrying on here. Okay. So this talks a little bit about moving screenshots, and you can read that and watch that video. Now, about the screenshots themselves. So you're going to have to submit screenshots for the week 1 lab, but also for the final project and a bunch of different assignments. So in general, screenshots have to be clear and easy to read. So look at this class as you're practicing for professional work. If you're not already using screenshots in your professional lives, think about, if you were a reader, what would you want to see? Okay, the screenshot should be clear. The reader should not have to enlarge it or put on their glasses if they don't normally wear them. It should uh, be intuitive what the reader should look at when they see the screenshot for the first time. And the reader shouldn't have to figure out what part of the screenshot to look at. And I'm going to show you an illustration, and this should just be that picture that's worth 1,000 words. So both of these screenshots are trying to convey the same information. You can see the screenshot on top has all this stuff on it, lots of browsers open, lots of extra stuff, and then you've got this, screenshot of the command line interface over on the left side, but it's really super small. You can't really tell what you're supposed to look at. And then in the bottom picture is this nice, clear image, and the area that the reader is supposed to see is actually, marked or highlighted. There's a box around it in that red font or red marking. So anyway, just keep that in mind when you do your screenshots. So when I actually had the live conference that wasn't recorded, someone said, is there a time that you should text? And you can text me anytime. If it's the middle of the night and you get up early for work, or you work late shift, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, it's fine to text me. If I'm sleeping, I'll have my phone on do not disturb, and I will respond to you as soon as I can. If you would like to set up a time for a phone call, you can call me anytime, and if I'm available, I'd be happy to talk to you. But a lot of times, it's just, I want to be sure that I'm at a computer. If I need to walk you through something, and sometimes I just don't, always respond to the ringing phone, because Lord knows whose it could be, right? I mean, we just texting works really well. And if you say, "Hey, do you have time for a quick call?" I can say yes, or "Hey, give me 5 minutes," and then I will. So that's kind of the best way to contact me, or through Canvas. You can also email me. I just don't check my email messages as often as I do my text and my Canvas. So I think that's everything we covered. And again, I apologize for the lack of Zoom recording, but this will actually, I think I covered everything, and I probably did it more efficiently. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. And I really am looking forward to a great class. Thanks.